It's Kingdom of Mist here again. What's the latest news from the palace today? No excuses were offered. No official statement could salvage the situation. The bitterest truth at Buckingham Palace was laid bare. As Prince William assumed full strategic control and the Duchess of Edinburgh stepped forward to attest to the shattered standards, Camilla, once uninvolved in the ousting of her sister-in-law, the Duchess of York, found herself at the center of the reckoning. Camilla's downfall is just the beginning. Do you think the royal family will stay silent? Or will they strike back covertly? Don't just watch from the sidelines. Hit subscribe now to secure your front row seat and witness the next verdict carried out by Prince William. Camilla was a master at making her husband's sister-in-law feel indebted to her, thereby prompting her to take the initiative in pressuring the lawful wife to separate from her husband. Securing a royal seal of approval and satisfying Sarah Ferguson's desire for status was precisely the method Camilla employed. Sophie also revealed that Camilla never held the authority of a queen. The late Queen Elizabeth never truly accepted her. Camilla believed that her position at the top of the royal hierarchy, secured by the crown her husband wore and the official title of consort bestowed upon her, made her immune to the rising tide of public and constitutional judgment. She made a grave mistake. By the final weeks of July 2026, the internal architecture of Buckingham Palace had undergone an irreversible shift. King Charles III, wrestling with the punishing physical toll of prolonged cancer treatments and mentally exhausted by decades of relentless media hostility, reached a point of profound institutional alienation. Confronted by catastrophic polling metrics among younger generations and paralyzed by the mounting legal liabilities surrounding his brother Andrew, the reigning monarch quietly yielded the strategic helm of the crown. In a move carefully shielded from the press, Charles granted Prince William absolute unappealable authority to issue final institutional decrees regarding royal titles, public representation, and crisis management. When William stepped into this void of executive power, his primary objective was not merely the public neutralization of Sarah Ferguson, but the systematic dismantling of the very woman who had orchestrated Ferguson's protection, Queen Camilla. What Camilla had smugly miscalculated as a bulletproof tenure as queen consort was instantly exposed as a fragile, artificial construct built entirely on coercive backroom bartering and the unauthorized abuse of royal seals. Under William's uncompromising directive, the truth regarding Camilla's illegitimacy, her decades of backroom manipulation, and her treasonous co-opting of the sovereign's authority was laid bare before the royal household, stripping away the polished myth of her constitutional ascension. To comprehend the full magnitude of William's July 2026 offensive, one must examine the dark, unwritten history of 1997, a period when the tragedy of Princess Diana's death left the nation in deep mourning, yet provided Camilla Parker Bowles with her first desperate opportunity to seize power. Following the tragic car crash in Paris that claimed Diana's life, the public's rage toward Camilla reached an unprecedented peak. She was viewed not merely as a marital interloper, but as the architect of Diana's suffering. Yet, while the royal family and the global public were paralyzed with grief, Camilla, operating as an unsanctioned mistress without a single official title, began systematically infiltrating the administrative apparatus of the Prince of Wales. It was during this period of raw, collective trauma that Camilla executed one of the most brazen acts of institutional overreach in modern monarchical history: the unauthorized rehabilitation of Sarah Ferguson. Following her high-profile 1996 divorce from Prince Andrew, which was preceded by the infamous toe-sucking scandal that humiliated the crown, Sarah Ferguson faced total financial ruin and complete social ostracization. Crucially, while Princess Diana was stripped of her Royal Highness, HRH, status during her divorce settlement, Queen Elizabeth II personally stepped in to ensure Diana retained the prestigious title of Princess of Wales, honoring both public adoration and her dedicated service to the nation. By contrast, when Sarah Ferguson divorced, Queen Elizabeth II strictly refused to sign any royal warrant or issue letters patent granting Sarah the permanent, sanctioned right to retain the style and title of Duchess of York. From a strictly legal and constitutional standpoint, Sarah Ferguson's continued public usage of the York title from 1996 onward was entirely unratified by the sovereign. She was a private citizen exploiting an unsanctioned royal brand. The question that has haunted royal historians for decades: how Sarah Ferguson managed to brazenly parade the Duchess of York title across global media platforms for 30 years without royal intervention finds its answer in the shadow cabinet created by Camilla Parker Bowles. In 1997, exploiting a grieving and vulnerable Charles, Camilla began using the Prince of Wales's authority to grant Sarah covert protection. Insiders within the royal household have long whispered of two damning possibilities. Either Camilla directly manipulated Charles into bypassing his mother's explicit wishes, or she physically misappropriated the Prince of Wales's personal signet seal to validate administrative favors and organizational patronages for Sarah behind the Queen's back. This was not an act of sisterly compassion. It was a cold, calculated transaction of mutual survival. Camilla recognized that as a reviled figure, she needed a network of loyalists who would owe her their entire existence. By intervening to save Sarah from absolute ruin, Camilla secured a permanent asset within the royal perimeter. A prime example of this covert rehabilitation occurred following the death of Camilla's brother, Mark Shand, when Camilla personally orchestrated Sarah's reinstatement as a patron of the Elephant Family Charity, a high-profile platform that allowed Sarah to maintain a veneer of royal philanthropy. To solidify this illicit alliance, Sarah paid her debt through relentless, public groveling. Over the decades, Sarah repeatedly took to international television to praise Camilla's resilience, framing her as the warm, stabilizing force behind King Charles. In an extraordinary interview that laid bare the depth of her submission, Sarah publicly proclaimed, "Diana was my best friend since I was 14. That is why the fact that Queen Camilla and I get along so well today carries such immense meaning. She reminds me of my mother, and I greatly admire the extraordinary support she is giving to the country." To the public, this quote was presented as a touching olive branch of reconciliation. To Prince William, who watched from afar as his mother's memory was exploited, it was a grotesque betrayal. Sarah Ferguson had actively sold out the legacy of Princess Diana, the woman who had sheltered her during her darkest years, in exchange for a fake title and financial survival guaranteed by the very woman who had made Diana's life a living hell. The tragedy of the relationship between Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson was never a simple rivalry for royal attention. It was a brutal psychological game manufactured by a hostile media machine and ruthlessly manipulated by Camilla from the sidelines. When Sarah entered the royal family in 1986, Diana had already spent 5 agonizing years trapped in the suffocating solitude of Buckingham Palace, battling severe bulimia, cold detachment from Charles, and profound emotional isolation. Diana naively believed Sarah would be her ultimate ally, a confidant to share the crushing burden of royal life. Instead, the establishment immediately weaponized Sarah's boisterous, uninhibited personality against Diana. Court insiders and tabloid headlines endlessly demanded to know why Diana could not be as fun, warm, and effortless as Fergie. Prince Charles famously wounded Diana by declaring he wished she were more like Sarah. Yet, history conceals a vital truth. The woman who truly stood by Diana during those dark, isolating years, offering genuine grace and dignified companionship without playing media games, was not the opportunistic Sarah Ferguson, but Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, then Sophie Rhys-Jones, wife of Prince Edward. Sophie possessed the quiet integrity and institutional discipline that Sarah so glaringly lacked. When Sarah's world imploded in 1992, she realized she had no real allies left inside the palace. Facing the exact same cruel expulsion that Diana faced, Sarah chose a radically different path of survival. While Diana fought the institution with raw honesty, Sarah pledged her soul to Camilla Parker Bowles. Camilla, desperate to build a private power base to facilitate her eventual integration into the royal family, offered Sarah a deal. Camilla would use her growing influence over Charles to ensure Sarah retained her unratified title, access to royal estates like Royal Lodge, and invitations to private family gatherings. In return, Sarah became Camilla's media mouthpiece, subtly rehabilitating Camilla's image, while shielding Prince Andrew's increasingly dubious personal life behind a fake facade of a happy, divorced family living together. This unholy alliance created a profound, festering sense of injustice that damaged the moral credibility of the British monarchy for a generation. The British public was forced to digest a bitter, hypocritical reality. Princess Diana, a global icon who dedicated her youth, spirit, and humanitarian vision to the realm, was stripped of her HRH title with cold bureaucratic cruelty. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson, a woman who embarrassed the nation with endless financial scandals, including the infamous 2010 sting where she was filmed attempting to sell access to Prince Andrew for £500,000, was allowed to parade around the world as the Duchess of York, leveraging a fake royal title to clear her personal debts. The title that Camilla helped Sarah preserve was transformed into a commercial commodity, dragged through the mud of international infomercials and bribery schemes. Furthermore, by keeping Sarah within the inner sanctuary of the royal household, Camilla helped maintain a dangerous psychological and PR shield around Prince Andrew. For decades, the illusion of Andrew living peacefully alongside his devoted ex-wife at Royal Lodge softened his public image, blurring the sinister reality of his association with international sex offender Jeffrey Epstein until the explosive dam finally burst. By late July 2026, Prince William decided that the era of toxic compromises was over. Taking full advantage of the executive powers surrendered by his ailing father, William launched an uncompromising offensive aimed at severing this rot at its root. Armed with exhaustive legal dossiers and historical records, William formally initiated the legislative and constitutional process to strip Sarah Ferguson of her unratified Duchess of York title once and for all. William's rationale was razor-sharp and devastatingly clear. He argued that it was legally, morally, and institutionally absurd for a woman who had been divorced for 30 years, who performed zero official royal duties, and who was explicitly implicated in American legal documents surrounding the Epstein network to continue monetizing a royal title. William made it clear that removing Sarah was non-negotiable. The crown could not pretend to purge Andrew while allowing his ex-wife to tarnish the House of York. However, the true, lethal genius of William's July 2026 strike lay in its secondary target. By stripping Sarah Ferguson of her title, William was not just discarding a disgraced royal associate. He was deliberately severing Camilla's most important strategic ally of 50 years, dismantling her private network, and sending an unmistakable shockwave directly to the Queen Consort herself. When William confronted the royal household with his final determinations, he did not resort to emotional outbursts or cheap character assassination. Instead, he presented cold historical facts regarding the events of 1997, 2010, and 2022. He brought to light the dark history of how Camilla had used unauthorized authority to prop up Sarah, reminding the room of the intense public disgust that had accumulated over decades due to this favoritism. When William laid out the stark reality, exposing how Camilla's backroom dealings had degraded the crown's moral authority, Camilla sat completely stunned, unable to utter a single word of defense. The articulate, manipulative strategist, who had successfully navigated 30 years of royal scandals, was left entirely speechless, her arguments paralyzed by the undeniable weight of her own past transgressions. The ultimate tragedy of Camilla's position, which William laid bare during these fateful July meetings, is that her very elevation to Queen Consort was built upon a foundation of extortion and institutional exhaustion. The truth behind Queen Elizabeth II's historic Platinum Jubilee announcement in February 2022, where she expressed her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort, was not an endorsement born of genuine love or respect. It was a desperate, bitter concession forced upon an aging, exhausted sovereign. In the years leading up to 2022, as Prince Andrew faced catastrophic legal claims in the United States, his legal fees and out-of-court settlements ballooned into millions of pounds, threatening to bankrupt his private estate and force a devastating public trial. To save her favorite son from a court appearance that would have destroyed the monarchy, Queen Elizabeth II was backed into a corner. Charles and Camilla recognized this moment of extreme vulnerability and struck a ruthless bargain. Financial support for Andrew's legal bailouts, funded through the vast revenues of the Duchy of Cornwall under Charles's control, would be granted, but only in exchange for the Queen's official, public endorsement of Camilla as Queen Consort. The late Queen, worn down by grief following the death of Prince Philip and physically failing, signed what was essentially a strategic ransom note. The Privy Council and senior palace officials endorsed the title not out of reverence for Camilla, but because they were trapped in an institutional framework designed to prevent the immediate collapse of the royal family before the world's media. Before her passing, in September 2022, Queen Elizabeth II privately acknowledged the bitter truth. Granting Camilla the title of Queen Consort was merely a temporary media bandage to ensure a smooth transition for Charles. A hollow compromise that could never erase the fundamental illegitimacy of how it was obtained. Now, in July 2026, that temporary bandage has been violently ripped away. With King Charles III stepping back due to failing health, the artificial shield protecting Camilla has dissolved. Prince William holds the absolute, unchallengeable power to dictate the future of the crown. Camilla's lifelong ambition, her triumphant journey from a reviled mistress to an untouchable queen, has been exposed as a hollow, fraudulent triumph. As William prepares to finalize the public decrees that will strip Sarah Ferguson of her title and permanently curtail Camilla's royal authority, the Queen Consort is left to face the terrifying reality she tried so hard to evade. She was never a true queen in the eyes of history, and the crown she wears is nothing more than a temporary, fragile loan controlled entirely by the son of Princess Diana. The psychological warfare that defined the relationship between Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson was never a simple conflict for media attention. It was a sinister, calculated game manufactured by an aggressive tabloid press and covertly exploited by Camilla Parker Bowles from the shadows. When Sarah Ferguson entered the royal family in 1986, Princess Diana had already spent 5 agonizing years trapped in the suffocating isolation of Buckingham Palace. Diana was privately battling severe bulimia, cold emotional detachment from Prince Charles, and a profound sense of institutional abandonment. She, naive and desperate for a true confidant, expected Sarah to be her ultimate ally, a warm companion with whom she could share the crushing burden of royal life. Instead, the establishment immediately weaponized Sarah's loud, uninhibited personality against Diana. Court insiders and tabloid journalists endlessly demanded to know why Diana could not be as fun, warm, and effortless as the new Duchess of York. Prince Charles famously wounded Diana by declaring that he wished she were more like Sarah. Yet, history conceals a vital truth regarding that era. The woman who truly stood by Diana during those dark, isolating years, offering genuine grace and dignified companionship without playing media games, was not the opportunistic Sarah Ferguson, but Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, who was then known as Sophie Rhys-Jones, before her marriage to Prince Edward. Sophie possessed the quiet integrity and institutional discipline that Sarah so glaringly lacked. When Sarah's personal life imploded in 1996 following her divorce from Prince Andrew, she faced total financial ruin and complete social ostracization. Facing the exact same cruel expulsion that Diana faced, Sarah chose a radically different path of survival. While Diana fought the institution with raw honesty, Sarah pledged her loyalty to Camilla Parker Bowles. At that time, Camilla was universally viewed as the ultimate marriage breaker and the primary enemy of the monarchy. To systematically penetrate the royal administrative structure and win over Prince Charles, Camilla needed to construct her own private network of loyalists. By using her growing emotional influence over Charles to convince Queen Elizabeth II to allow Sarah to retain her unratified title of Duchess of York, Camilla transformed Sarah into a permanent chess piece who owed her an eternal debt of gratitude. Sarah understood that the title of Duchess of York was her only lifeline to maintain a personal brand, sell books, and secure lucrative speaking engagements across the United States. Accepting Camilla's covert intervention meant Sarah accepted her role as an insider spy and a dedicated defender of Camilla's public image. This transactional relationship gave Sarah a prestigious royal shield, while Camilla received absolute loyalty and a vocal public defender during the years when the British public boycotted her most intensely. This covert intervention did not bring peace or stability to the monarchy. Instead, it ignited a lingering media crisis that spanned several decades. The British public gradually recognized a profound, bitter injustice within the royal structure. Princess Diana, a devoted global figure who dedicated her youth and humanitarian passion to the realm, was stripped of her Royal Highness status with cold bureaucratic cruelty. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson, a figure entangled in endless financial scandals and embarrassing tabloid exposure, was allowed to keep her title as Duchess of York through backroom arrangements orchestrated by Camilla Parker Bowles. This glaring favor convinced the public that the royal family operated as a factional political machine rather than a moral institution. Once Sarah secured her unratified title, she transformed it into a commercial asset. This reached a disgraceful peak in 2010, when she was secretly filmed attempting to sell direct access to Prince Andrew for £500,000. The title that Camilla helped preserve became a public commodity, deeply tarnishing the dignity of the crown. Furthermore, keeping Sarah within the inner circle of Buckingham Palace created a psychological and media barrier around Prince Andrew. Although divorced, Sarah continued to share a residence with Andrew, using her royal title to project an image of a harmonious household. This facade obscured the dark reality of Andrew's personal life for years, delaying the public reckoning over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Viewed objectively, this arrangement was a classic example of adversaries uniting for mutual interest. Camilla and Sarah did not share genuine affection or sisterly empathy. They were two ambitious individuals who recognized the vulnerabilities of the royal system and chose to exploit the prestige of the crown for their own survival. The continued existence of Sarah's title stood as proof of one of Camilla's most successful behind-the-scenes maneuvers. By late July 2026, Prince William made it clear that this era of toxic compromises was over. Taking full advantage of the strategic authority surrendered by his ailing father, William launched a decisive campaign to eliminate this rot. Armed with detailed legal dossiers, William formally initiated the process to strip Sarah Ferguson of her unratified title. His reasoning was clear and unyielding. He argued that it was morally and institutionally unacceptable for a private citizen, divorced for 30 years and implicated in American court documents related to Epstein, to monetize a royal title. William made it clear that removing Sarah was non-negotiable. The crown could not pretend to address Andrew's failures while allowing his former wife to tarnish the House of York. However, the primary impact of William's move was directed elsewhere. By stripping Sarah of her title, William was not merely discarding a compromised associate. He was systematically severing Camilla's primary ally of 50 years, dismantling her influence, and delivering a direct warning to the Queen Consort herself. When Prince William confronted the senior members of the royal household in late July 2026, he avoided emotional outbursts or aggressive character assassination. Instead, he presented cold historical records detailing the events of 1997, 2010, and 2022. He brought to light the covert history of how Camilla Parker Bowles had used unauthorized authority to support Sarah Ferguson, reminding everyone of the intense public disgust that had accumulated over decades due to this blatant favoritism. When William exposed how Camilla's backroom dealings had systematically eroded the moral authority of the crown, Camilla sat completely stunned, unable to utter a single word of defense. The articulate strategist who had navigated 30 years of royal scandals was left entirely speechless, her arguments paralyzed by the undeniable weight of her own past transgressions. William made it clear that her actions had created a permanent stain on the monarchy, leaving her without any ground for rebuttal. The ultimate tragedy of Camilla's position, which William exposed during these fateful July meetings, is that her very elevation to Queen Consort was built upon a foundation of extortion and institutional exhaustion. The truth behind Queen Elizabeth II's historic Platinum Jubilee announcement in February 2022, where she expressed her wish for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort, was not an endorsement born of genuine affection. It was a desperate concession forced upon an aging, exhausted sovereign. In the years leading up to 2022, as Prince Andrew faced catastrophic legal claims in the United States, his legal fees and out-of-court settlements ballooned into millions of pounds, threatening to force a devastating public trial. To save her favorite son from a court appearance that would have destroyed the royal family, Queen Elizabeth II was backed into a corner. Charles and Camilla recognized this extreme vulnerability and struck a ruthless bargain. Financial support for Andrew's legal bailouts, funded through the vast revenues of the Duchy of Cornwall under Charles's control, would be granted, but only in exchange for the Queen's official endorsement of Camilla as Queen Consort. The late Queen, worn down by grief following the death of Prince Philip and physically failing, signed what was essentially a strategic ransom note. The Privy Council and senior palace officials endorsed the title not out of reverence for Camilla, but because they were trapped in an institutional framework designed to prevent the immediate collapse of the monarchy before the global media. Before her passing in September 2022, Queen Elizabeth II privately acknowledged the bitter truth. Granting Camilla the title of Queen Consort was merely a temporary media bandage to ensure a smooth transition for Charles, a hollow compromise that could never erase the fundamental illegitimacy of how it was obtained. By late July 2026, that temporary bandage had been violently ripped away from the royal institution. With King Charles III stepping back from active governance due to his deteriorating health, the artificial shield that had long protected Camilla completely dissolved. Prince William was left holding absolute, unchallengeable power to dictate the future of the crown. Camilla's lifelong ambition, her triumphant journey from a reviled mistress to an untouchable queen consort, was exposed as a hollow, fraudulent triumph. As William prepared to finalize the public decrees that would strip Sarah Ferguson of her title and permanently curtail Camilla's royal authority, the queen consort was left to face the terrifying reality she had tried so hard to evade. She was never a true queen in the eyes of history, and the crown she wore was nothing more than a temporary, fragile loan controlled entirely by the son of Princess Diana. The political shift inside Buckingham Palace marked the final collapse of the shadow cabinet Camilla had spent 30 years assembling. For decades, her position relied on the absolute devotion of King Charles III and the quiet tolerance of an institutional hierarchy eager to avoid further public scandals. However, as the physical toll of severe illness eroded the king's capacity to shield his wife from public scrutiny, the balance of power tilted decisively toward the Prince of Wales. William did not view Camilla as an irreplaceable symbol of continuity. He saw her as a massive strategic liability whose past maneuvers continued to undermine the survival of the monarchy among younger generations. The authority Charles surrendered to his son was not a partial delegation of ceremonial duties, but a complete transfer of constitutional and strategic judgment. In exercising this authority, William systematically dismantled the narrative that Camilla had earned her place through quiet service and dignified patience. The exhaustive dossiers presented to the royal household proved that her ascension was driven by calculated bargains and unauthorized influence. Her attempt to present herself as an innocent bystander during the scandals of the House of York fell apart under the weight of historical documentation, showing her direct role in protecting Sarah Ferguson. Camilla's silence during the crucial July confrontations was a silent admission that her power had always been derivative, existing only so long as Charles could enforce it. Without his active protection, her position evaporated. The future of the British monarchy was no longer being shaped in the private sitting rooms of Charles and Camilla, but in the executive offices of Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who represented the true, uncompromised continuity of the crown. The formal announcement scheduled for the autumn of 2026 represents far more than an administrative adjustment of royal styles and titles. It marks the definitive end of an era defined by backroom bargains, transactional loyalties, and the systematic distortion of royal traditions. By stripping Sarah Ferguson of her unratified title and stripping Camilla Parker Bowles of her operational influence, Prince William has sent an unmistakable signal to the nation and the global Commonwealth. The modern monarchy under his stewardship will no longer tolerate the monetization of royal prestige or the elevation of individuals who traded the moral authority of the crown for personal survival. For Sarah Ferguson, the loss of her title as Duchess of York closes a 30-year chapter of relentless commercialization and controversy. Without the royal shield that Camilla spent decades preserving on her behalf, Sarah stands fully exposed as a private citizen whose public relevance has expired. The network that protected her from the consequences of her financial scandals and her association with Prince Andrew has been completely dismantled. The House of York, long a source of embarrassment and crisis for Buckingham Palace, has been effectively neutralized as a distinct faction within the royal family, fulfilling a strategic objective that William had pursued since the dark days of 1997. For Camilla, the realization of her total isolation has brought a profound and bitter humiliation. The woman who endured decades of public hostility to achieve the ultimate prize of the queen consort title now finds herself stripped of real power, residing in a gilded cage built upon a foundation that has entirely collapsed. Her illusion of invulnerability, nurtured by years of Charles's unconditional support, proved incapable of surviving the cold, pragmatic judgment of Princess Diana's eldest son. As King Charles III recedes further into the background to focus on his health, Camilla is left without a political base, without trusted allies inside the palace, and without the public affection required to sustain her position. Prince William's decisive intervention in late July 2026 has fundamentally reshaped the British monarchy for generations to come. By confronting the dark history of the past 30 years with uncompromising clarity, he has reclaimed the moral high ground that was sacrificed during the chaotic years following his mother's death. The legacy of Princess Diana, once exploited and marginalized by those who sought to replace her, has ultimately prevailed, through the strategic brilliance of her son. As the crown prepares for its inevitable transition into a new era, the lesson of July 2026 remains clear. True authority within the House of Windsor is not bought through transactional bargains, but earned through unyielding integrity and an absolute commitment to the service of the nation.